An old man lay shivering on a thin cot in the corner of a veteran's shelter, his lips moving in restless sleep. The words that escaped were barely audible, a ragged whisper that drifted through the darkness like smoke. Valkyrie 6. Valkyrie 6. Pull up. Pull up. The shelter manager paused in the doorway, clipboard frozen mid-notation. He had heard thousands of veterans talk in their sleep over the years. He had heard them call out for medics. He had heard them scream warnings to men long dead. But he had never heard those words. Valkyrie 6. A call sign from a mission that officially never existed. A mission he had been told had no survivors. If this story reminds you why we must never forget those who served in silence, comment "Honor" below. Colonel Marcus Webb had retired from the United States Air Force 12 years ago, trading his oak leaf clusters for a modest office at the Cornerstone Veterans Shelter in rural Virginia. Most people assumed he had taken the position out of boredom, a way to fill the empty hours that retirement inevitably brings. They were wrong. Marcus had spent 31 years in military intelligence, and he had seen what happened to the men who fell through the cracks of the system. The forgotten warriors. The ones whose service was classified so deeply that even their families never knew what they had sacrificed. He had watched too many of them disappear into homelessness, addiction, and early graves. When he retired, he made himself a promise. He would spend whatever years he had left making sure that at least some of them found their way home. The man in the corner cot had arrived 3 weeks earlier, brought in by a local police officer who had found him sleeping beneath an overpass. His intake form listed his name as Walter. Just Walter. No last name. No social security number. No military records that anyone could locate. He appeared to be somewhere in his late 70s or early 80s, though it was difficult to tell. His face was weathered by decades of hard living, his hair a thin white wisp across a scalp marked by faded scars. He rarely spoke during waking hours. When he did, his voice was soft and hesitant, as if he had forgotten how to form words. The other residents left him alone, sensing something fragile in his silence. The staff treated him with gentle patience, assuming he was simply another casualty of time and circumstance. But Marcus had noticed something different about Walter from the very first day. There was a precision to his movements, even in confusion, a discipline that surfaced in small moments, the way he made his bed with military corners, the way he stood slightly straighter when the flag was raised each morning outside the shelter, the way his eyes tracked movement with tactical awareness, despite his apparent disorientation. Marcus had requested Walter's file from the Veterans Administration twice. Both times the response came back the same. No records found. That alone was unusual. The VA had records on almost everyone who had ever served. For there to be nothing at all suggested one of two possibilities. Either Walter had never actually served in the military, or his service had been erased. And now, standing in the doorway listening to those words tumble from sleeping lips, Marcus felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. He knew exactly which possibility was true. The XB-70 Valkyrie was never supposed to exist in the public consciousness. Officially, it was an experimental supersonic bomber developed by North American Aviation in the early 1960s. The program produced only 2 aircraft, magnificent 6-engine giants capable of flying at 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 70,000 feet. The Air Force had promoted the Valkyrie as a research platform after the bomber program was cancelled, a way to study high-speed flight characteristics. In June of 1966, one of the 2 aircraft had been destroyed in a catastrophic mid-air collision during a photo shoot, killing 2 pilots. The official story ended there, but Marcus knew the official story was incomplete. During his years in intelligence, he had stumbled across references to something called Operation Valkyrie Six, a highly classified mission conducted in the fall of 1965, months before the public accident. The details were buried so deeply that even his clearance level could only scratch the surface. What he had learned was fragmentary, but haunting. A test flight at the edge of the atmosphere, an encounter with something that was never fully explained in the documents, multiple casualties, and a single survivor whose identity had been scrubbed from every database, whose existence had been effectively erased to protect whatever secrets he carried. Marcus approached Walter's cot slowly, his footsteps deliberate on the worn linoleum floor. The old man was still murmuring, his hands twitching against the thin blanket as if working phantom controls. Altitude warning. Structural failure. They're all gone. Valkyrie 6, requesting immediate... His voice trailed off into incoherent fragments, then fell silent. Marcus stood there for a long moment, watching the veteran's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of exhausted sleep. He had spent 12 years waiting for something like this. 12 years wondering if any of the ghosts from those classified files would ever walk through his doors. And now one had. The question was what to do about it. The next morning, Marcus made a phone call he had hoped he would never have to make. The number was unlisted, memorized rather than written down, connected to a desk at the Pentagon that officially did not exist. The woman who answered identified herself only as a coordinator. Marcus identified himself by his retired rank and his old intelligence service number. There was a pause. Then the woman asked how she could assist him. Marcus chose his words carefully. I have a resident at my facility. Elderly male, approximately late 70s to early 80s. No identification, no records. Possible cognitive decline. Last night he spoke in his sleep. He used the call sign Valkyrie 6. He referenced altitude warnings and structural failure. He said they're all gone. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When the coordinator spoke again, her voice had changed. It was harder now, more focused. Colonel Webb, I need you to understand that what you've just told me initiates a very specific protocol. Can you confirm the exact words he used? Valkyrie 6 specifically, Marcus confirmed. The coordinator told him to expect visitors within 72 hours. She told him to say nothing to anyone. She told him that Walter was not to leave the facility under any circumstances. Then she hung up. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Marcus went about his duties as normally as possible, but his attention kept drifting back to the old man in the corner cot. Walter seemed to sense nothing unusual. He ate his meals in silence. He sat in the common room staring at nothing. He slept his restless sleep and whispered his fragmented secrets into the darkness. On the third day, Marcus noticed something that made his heart ache. Walter had found a piece of scrap paper somewhere. He was folding it with trembling fingers, creating the crude shape of an aircraft. A delta-wing aircraft with a distinctive downward drooping nose, the silhouette of the Valkyrie. When Walter finished, he held the paper model up to the window, tilting it back and forth, as if watching it soar through imaginary skies. His eyes, usually so vacant and distant, held a flicker of something that looked almost like remembrance. The visitors arrived on the afternoon of the third day. 3 black vehicles pulled into the shelter parking lot with the kind of precision that spoke of military coordination. Marcus watched from his office window as the doors opened and 6 figures emerged. 4 were clearly security personnel, young men in dark suits with the alert posture of active duty military police. The 5th was a woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of an Air Force brigadier general. The 6th was an elderly man in civilian clothes, walking with the aid of a cane but carrying himself with unmistakable authority. Marcus met them at the entrance. The general introduced herself as Brigadier General Patricia Thornton, attached to a special projects office that she did not name. The elderly civilian was introduced simply as Dr. Harrison. No first name, no further explanation. General Thornton asked to see the resident in question. Marcus led them to the common room. Walter was sitting in his usual chair by the window, the paper aeroplane still clutched in his hands. He did not look up as the group approached. He did not seem to register their presence at all. General Thornton stopped several feet away, her face unreadable. Dr. Harrison moved closer, studying Walter with an intensity that bordered on reverence. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Dr. Harrison lowered himself into the chair beside Walter, groaning slightly at the protest of aging joints. He reached out and gently touched the paper aeroplane. "You still remember how to make these," he said softly. "You taught me that fold, the stabilizing crease along the nose." September 1965. Edwards Air Force Base. Walter's hands stopped moving. His head turned slowly, eyes focusing on Dr. Harrison's face with sudden, startling clarity. Something sparked in those faded eyes. Recognition. Memory. pain. "Harrison," Walter whispered. "You were ground control. You were in my ear when—" He could not finish the sentence. Dr. Harrison nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I was there, Walter. I heard everything. I've spent 60 years thinking you were dead. We all did. The report said no survivors. The report said the aircraft disintegrated at altitude. But you're here. My God, you're here." What followed was a story that Marcus would carry with him for the rest of his life. In a quiet corner of the shelter, surrounded by security personnel who ensured no one else could hear, Dr. Harrison and General Thornton explained what had happened 6 decades ago. The XB-70 Valkyrie had been more than an experimental aircraft. It had been a platform for testing systems so advanced that they remained classified even now. The flight, designated Valkyrie Six, had been the culmination of years of secret development. Lieutenant Walter Reeves had been the lead test pilot, a man whose skills and security clearance made him uniquely qualified for missions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Something had gone wrong at the edge of space. The details remained unclear even after all these years. What was known was that the aircraft had experienced catastrophic structural failure at an altitude and speed that should have been instantly fatal. 2 crew members had died. Lieutenant Reeves had somehow survived, ejecting in conditions that defied every engineering model they had. He had been recovered from the desert floor with injuries so severe that his survival was considered miraculous. But the trauma had done something to his mind. The memories of what happened during those final moments, the things he had seen and experienced, had fragmented. The military, terrified that he might inadvertently reveal classified information, had made the decision to erase his identity entirely. He was given a new name, a fabricated history, and a modest disability pension that was deposited into an account he never knew existed. He was supposed to live out his days in quiet anonymity. Instead, he had slipped through the cracks entirely, disappearing into the margins of society where no one thought to look. General Thornton stood at attention as she addressed Walter directly. "Lieutenant Reeves, on behalf of the United States Air Force and the grateful nation you served, I am here to formally recognize your service and sacrifice. The records of your heroism have been declassified at the highest levels. Your family has been notified. Your honors, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Force Cross, will be presented to you in a ceremony at the Pentagon next month. You are no longer forgotten, sir. You never should have been." Walter listened in silence, his face a shifting landscape of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and somewhere beneath it all, the faintest glimmer of something that might have been peace. He looked down at the paper aeroplane in his hands, then back up at the faces surrounding him. "I remember the sky," he said slowly. "I remember how blue it was, and then how black. I remember thinking, this is what dying looks like. But I'm still here." "Doctor," Harrison reached out and clasped Walter's trembling hand. "You're still here, old friend, and we're going to make sure everyone knows why." The ceremony at the Pentagon was attended by senators, generals, and veterans from across 6 decades of American military history. Walter Reeves, dressed in a uniform that had been tailored to fit his diminished frame, stood as straight as his body would allow while medals were pinned to his chest. The President of the United States sent a personal letter, read aloud by General Thornton, praising Lieutenant Reeves as a symbol of the countless silent warriors whose sacrifices made American security possible. But it was the moment after the ceremony that Marcus would remember most vividly. Walter had returned to the shelter one final time before moving to a proper veterans' care facility, where he would spend his remaining days with the dignity he deserved. As he walked through the common room, the other residents rose to their feet. They did not know the full story. They did not need to. They knew only that one of their own had been recognized. One of their own had been seen. Walter paused at the door, turning to look back at the men who had shared his anonymous existence for those few brief weeks. His eyes found Marcus across the room. He raised one trembling hand to his forehead in a salute. Marcus returned it, holding the gesture as tears slid down his weathered cheeks. There are men and women walking among us whose service will never be written in history books, whose sacrifices were classified before the blood was dry. whose names were erased so that the rest of us could sleep safely in our beds. Some of them live in shelters like Cornerstone. Some of them sleep beneath overpasses and on park benches. Some of them whisper secrets in their sleep that no one is left alive to understand. Walter Reeves spent 60 years as a ghost, forgotten by the nation he had served at the edge of space itself. But on one cold night in Virginia, a retired colonel heard a call sign that should not have existed, spoken by a survivor who should not have been alive. And because he listened, because he remembered, because he refused to let one more silent hero disappear into the darkness, a wrong was finally made right. The next time you pass someone who looks like they have nothing, remember Walter. Remember that you cannot see a person's history written on their face. Remember that some of the greatest heroes among us carry their medals on the inside, invisible to everyone except those who take the time to look. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that every veteran deserves to be remembered and that honor never expires, no matter how many years have passed.